Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending May 6th, our first official week of May. One more day of April, and then it's on to May. We're just trucking along there. It's kind of crazy. Um, we, of course, still are in a Mercury retrograde. We're in the second full week of the Mercury retrograde, actually, which is kind of crazy. It might get a little crazy actually with the moon action that is going on that's sort of playing into that retrograde a little bit. So it's getting a little crazy here. What's funny is the first week of the Mercury retrograde, I had to get so many messages asking me, when is it over? Oh my God. Oh, it's terrible, blah, 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 all these different things. And I don't even feel like we've really felt the full effects of it yet, if that makes sense. So looking into this week is a little bit scary actually, because it's just sort of like, oh my God. We haven't even seen how it's gonna screw us up yet. So let's get to it and see what kind of comes out of it, if that makes sense. We're going to go ahead and get started as we always do with Aries, of course. We have Jupiter forming a T-square with Mars and Pluto this week. And Pluto officially goes retrograde this week. So it's been 0 degrees Aquarius now for quite a few weeks. Moving into retrograde, it still continues to be 0 degrees Aquarius, and will for a bit, but it is moving back into Capricorn, but it really is right there on the cusp. Mars is getting pretty close to that cusp, but getting pretty close to the end of Cancer, but not quite yet. They're just all in this perfect line up with Jupiter that creates sort of a pretty big challenge, actually. Um, Jupiter's focus is on long-term goals. Aries' focus, therefore, is on long-term goals as well. Kitty tail, kitty tail. Thank you. He's an Aries cat, by the way, so he feels he can do that. And this is all about growth in terms of your long-term goals. So I kind of look at this as a time where you're sort of getting together your plans, your travel plans, any kind of education plans. You're never too young or too old to start learning something. And I really feel that that's really what the ninth house is all about. Pluto's focus is on your day-to-day schedule, and Mars is still sitting there in what I would refer to as our trauma, our personal trauma closet. It's the place that we store all of that trauma away. And it's been sitting in that place for a really long time. So we're really dealing with the release of a lot of old anger that just really isn't serving our best interests anymore. So while this is a challenge, I feel that it's a helpful challenge, because a lot of times circumstances have to come up in order to sort of force us into that release in some way, if that makes sense. So basically, it's uncomfortable and it's not something that you're necessarily going to want to, oh, goody, we're going to do this. But once you go through the process and you release and let go of some of that anger that isn't really serving you anymore, it does make things a lot easier. And you have a lot of things that you normally would have holding you back are no longer holding you back, if that makes sense. And this challenge actually is going to be there for, I wouldn't say the entire week. We officially move into this challenge about midweek. So with that being said, it sort of feels like the beginning of the week you're leading up to this emotional explosion or meltdown, for lack of a better way of saying it, because this emotional meltdown is really going to release a lot of things that have been getting in your way, especially in terms of your long-term goals. Jupiter's all about growth and expansion. Jupiter's like, we have to, yes, you have a goal, that's great. Let's expand on that. Let's make it bigger. And all of your self-doubt and all of the other negative things that are attached to that old trauma are going to come up with 1,000 excuses as to why you should not do that. Bottom line is your Aries. If you're go big or go home, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You shouldn't be shortchanging yourself for anything. And that's what this challenge is really bringing to light. We also have Jupiter in a sextile with Venus. Venus is still very much focused on your support system. Venus is a very feminine influence. So I sort of look at that as you and your posse of girlfriends getting down to business. This particular lineup really is helpful when you start to broaden your view of what your support system really looks like. And when we do that, we tend to really see it as something bigger than what we have been seeing it as. So if you're not, or you're feeling you're not getting the support from the one person that you always go to for support, broaden your horizons. You have a fantastic support system. I mean, you're Aries, you know everybody, right? Lean on them. I know that a lot of people don't like to do that. They're very independent. I get that, but we all have that space where we need to lean on somebody. So you might as well pick the right one to lean on. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, please do think about sending me a coffee. Click the link below in the description and send me a coffee. I would really appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to Taurus, where the party is, because of course the party is in Taurus. We've still got Uranus in Taurus. We have the sun in Taurus. We will continue to have the sun in Taurus for the rest of the week because we're still in Taurus season, and we have that retrograde Mercury in Taurus. So everything is going on pretty much in Taurus. That can be a bit overwhelming, I must say, when you have that much stuff going on in your sign. It can be exciting too. I mean, the sun's house is where you shine. It's all pointing to your career. When you are growing in your career, there's going to be a lot of challenges that present themselves, and that's really what these two planets are working together, or I'm sorry, these three planets are actually working together to provide some assistance, magical assistance into that career growth. But it's going to cause some challenges also. And it's really the overcoming of those challenges that shows people you can do the job, if that makes sense. It also, on another side of things, it also has a tendency to bring to light serious issues that you thought might be a little bit of a problem, and these things kind of come up and prove that you were spot on about the problem. So it also maybe provides you with a real reason to leave what you're doing with that company and move on to pursuing a job somewhere else, if that is also one of those things that seems to be coming up around you guys as well. The craziness that's really going to be going on here is going to be happening towards the end of the week as the moon starts to move into Scorpio. The moon moves into opposition with all three of these planets, and in some cases it's not just an no, it is just an opposition. Yes, oh no, I was right. In some cases, not just an opposition, but a bit of a T-square, actually, at least very close to a T-square. It's not quite 100%, because part of that T-square is actually being influenced by planets that are in Aries, but very close to Taurus. So not quite close enough to be felt, but still there, because all the planets are in proximity with each other to a certain extent, it is going to be felt a little bit. An opposition is a challenge. A T-square is a much bigger challenge. And this, if there was any planets at all in Leo, or Mars was just a titch moved over just a little bit, would be a much bigger challenge. Luckily, We don't have to deal with that. However, all focus is on career for you guys this week. The moon moves into Scorpio and moves into opposition, and in some cases provides an extra square in there to make this a T square. And the moon's focus is very much on home currently at this time right now. So this sort of provides some of those instances where you have responsibilities at work, you have a particular focus of moving forward in your career goals, but your responsibilities at home or your personal responsibilities all of a sudden become overwhelming, and you find it really hard to toggle back and forth between the two. My advice is that most of the time in that situation, we are not necessarily focused on both at the same time. Granted, there's always those instances where you're at work and home calls and there's a big problem and you have to focus on work, but you have to focus on the problem at home. That gets kind of tricky. But really what we're dealing with most of the time is that we have so many issues and things that we need to work on at home that we're thinking about it when we're at work, and vice versa. And that's what you want to get under control. That this whole lineup is happening to remind you to focus on what you're currently focusing on and not allowing other problems to infiltrate into that focus. That's when you start to get confused. That's when mistakes start happening. That's when all the trouble starts. So, and with Mercury in retrograde in the middle of all of this, you don't want to run the risk of accidentally miscommunicating something that you did not want to miscommunicate. Or you also don't want to run the risk of holding back on communication that really does need to be said, even if you're a diplomatic person and would rather not say something like that, if that makes sense. So part of Mercury's lesson for you is to speak up when you need to speak up, but part of Mercury's lesson also has a lot more to do with making sure that when you speak up, you're speaking the right lingo to get the right point across. And that's really important, especially in the world that we kind of live in right now, because a lot of miscommunication is really messing a lot of things up, and you want to make sure that you're not part of that messing up problem, even if it's inadvertently, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And if you love your horoscopes, please click the link in the description below and send me a coffee. I would greatly appreciate it. Moving on to Gemini, we continue to have Venus in Gemini, although this is really her last week in Gemini. We're ending the week 29 degrees in Gemini. That pretty much means that next week she'll be bumping on into Cancer, and we won't have really any planet influence, at least for a week or two. When we move into Gemini season, of course, it's coming. My mouth decided it wasn't going to work anymore. Venus is really lining up in many different ways with a few planets this week, specifically the moon. She's lining up with the moon in various different ways as we move through the week. As the moon is kind of, it's like all the planets are on top of the zodiac and there's really nothing on the bottom. Pardon me, at least this is how it's looking most of the time. So with that being said, of course, I am also looking at it at a time during the day. But for the most part, all the planets are sort of encompassing one half, and it's only the moon that moves around the bottom half currently right now, because we don't really have anything in the bottom half yet. It is coming. Trust me, it is coming. The moon does move into a trine with Venus towards the end of the week, about Friday, Saturday. And Venus is really focused on your support system. So Gemini's focus is very much on that support system as well this week. And I find that most Geminis have a very creative support system to begin with. Geminis are not necessarily, well, actually, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen Geminis that are very much not like everybody else, and I've seen Geminis that really love to fall into what everybody else is doing. Bottom line is, because you're a Gemini and that gives you a sense of being able to get along with all different kinds of personalities, then there are all different kinds of personalities encompassed in that support system as well. Maybe some of them don't get along with each other, but you get along with all of them. And that's really what's important. When you add that moon element to it towards the end of the week, the moon's focus is very much on the home. So I feel like a lot of the support that you're getting is around issues around the home. So these issues could be money issues, these they could be relationship problems, they could be, any kind of specific issues that you would deal with specifically around the home. And since it's the moon that's influencing this is a very small little challenge that does take place, and then you sort of move on from it because you're over it. I'm over it, right? And it's kind of the Gemini way. I'm really mad about this. Okay, I'm over it. We're moving on because I'm over it. In terms of creativity for self, I feel it's really important for you guys to harness this Venus energy this week while you have it, because once you don't have it anymore, you probably will miss it. And I feel like her influence in Gemini is providing a lot of very creative energy towards being creative in some way, but also giving you these different creative ways of solving some of the problems that you may have going on in your lives as well. So be aware of that also, because that is something that is probably could really help you out, especially if you're on a problem that you're just stuck on and can't figure out how to change it, if that makes sense. So that is what I have for you guys this week. Enjoy that Venus energy while you have it, because it feels like it's awesome and really a lot of fun. And if you love your horoscopes, please click the link below in the description and send me a coffee. I would greatly appreciate it. Moving on to Cancer, we continue to be focused on our trauma closet. We also continue to have Mars very much focused on that trauma. So we're still releasing old anger. It seems like it's taking forever for this to happen, but I'm not surprised either, because one of the things that I've really been seeing in the various different people is that they have not released anger over things in the past. They have not released their trauma over various different events that have happened in the past. And those individuals that don't do this release have a tendency to project that out into everybody around them, and they project it out into the situations that are going on in their lives, and they project it out on the world, as in the world owes them something because this happened to them. The world doesn't have enough money to pay up the amount of people who've gone through something like this. There's just no way, right? Because the amount of people that have gone through trauma in their lives is basically all of them. So the world is not going to basically pay you anything for it. You have to deal with it and you have to heal from it. And this is really why Mars has been set in this place for so incredibly long, because there are so many of us that have to be responsible for our own emotional release, our own stuff, basically our own dirty laundry. You don't hand your dirty laundry over to a neighbor and say, here, deal with this. I mean, maybe you do, and if you have a neighbor that does your laundry, more power to you, but most people don't have that. We have to do our own laundry and clean our own stuff. I also feel actually I do want to say here really quick as well that there is some interesting ways that Mars is lining up with other planets, specifically in a sextile with Uranus. Uranus is focused on career. And I feel like it's really important that you know that a lot of times some of that trauma really gets in the way of us being able to advance in our career because it provides us with excuses as to why we won't be good enough for the job, why we don't deserve the job. And releasing some of that trauma also releases some of those things that would quote unquote say that. So we are in a Mercury retrograde. Self-communication and understanding where that comes from is also very important and will be very much in your face during this time because Mercury is in retrograde. The other thing, though, is a pretty big challenge as Mars continues to be in opposition with Pluto, which goes retrograde this week, about midweek or so. Pluto's focus is on your day-to-day schedule. And when these traumatic responses take place, it definitely, like triggers, for example, it definitely gets in the way of you being able to focus on what you need to get done that day, for sure. In many ways makes it less successful energy to move forward in those goals. And then, of course, we do have Pluto, not Pluto. I just said Pluto. Jupiter is also part of that T square as well. Jupiter's focus is all on personal goals. So we're talking travel, we're talking education, we're talking moving forward in your career goals, we're talking financial goals, we're talking every goal you could possibly think of. Again, this inner trauma, holding on to anger over things that are out of your control, really gets in the way of your success with that also. So while it's a challenge, I feel like it is a challenge that is extremely helpful in many ways for you because even though you're being triggered, even though emotionally it's uncomfortable, it gives you the opportunity to be able to release some of those mindsets that just are not working for you. They're really holding you back. You don't want anything holding you back. Anything holding you back is really just gonna hold you back. You know what I mean? Who wants to do that? And when you release that trauma, I'm telling you, it's a freedom that you never thought was possible. And I know this for a fact because I've been in the same position of releasing of trauma release for many, many years. And it is a process that will probably take the rest of my life, and that's okay. From what I have released attachment to, there is an awful lot of freedom in there, and definitely a lot less of me making up excuses as to why I can't be successful, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, please click the link below in the description and send me a coffee. I would greatly appreciate it. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Leo. There ain't nothing going on in Leo. So Leos, you go ahead and party it up, okay? Because there is nothing going on in Libra. We don't even have the dark moon in Libra. Or in Leo. I'm sorry, we're in Leo here. We've got nothing except this one little tiny planet called Pallas Athene bumps into your sign right at the end of the week. And while Leo's focus is on self this week, Pallas Athene comes in and brings that sort of hidden inner trauma focus into the week, as if you really needed that. We have no moon influence, we have no nothing. But Pallas Athene comes in and says, hey, let's take a look at your inner trauma for a minute. Yeah, because you totally want to do that, right? Well, nobody wants to do it, but It is necessary to do every now and then, because if you're holding on to it, it's holding you back, period. And Pallas Athene is really, she's a secondary planet. She is a planet, not as heavy of an influence as the major planets, but she does have a very interesting influence. She is known as the Great Warrior, and she is, I would sort of explain Pallas Athene to be sort of like Xena the warrior princess, if that makes sense. That's what she looks like to me. Anyways, right? She doesn't take any crap. She'll stand up to any man and, take him down if needs be. She's a fighter. And I feel like her main message this week for a lot of you Leos is, I know you're tired of fighting, but you have to fight on, because life is a battle that never ends. And while I don't necessarily like to look at life as a battle, it truly is. You're constantly battling through your own BS, number one, and then the BS that everybody is throwing at you, that life is throwing at you. Just all of this stuff is constant, sometimes it feels. And we just get so tired, and we don't want to battle it anymore. We want things to be easy. If you look back on your life, honestly now, okay, honestly now, if you look back on your life, tell me when things were easy. We can talk ourselves into, when I was a kid and my parents were taking care of me, it was easy. Not everybody had parents that took care of them. Or if you did have parents that took care of you, so you didn't have to pay bills, great, that's easy. You had a certain amount of freedom, that's easy, but you didn't have complete freedom. You still had somebody telling you what to do. I can't wait till I grow up, so I have nobody to tell me what to do. And then you get a job and bam, you get told what to do. The IRS is telling you what to do. Everybody is telling you what to do. I don't think there's a point in life that we ever actually live an easy life, regardless of what's going on around us. So, Pallas Athene's influence really is a reminder for you guys. I know you're tired. Take a nap, take a couple of days off. That's fine. We live to fight another day. And it's not necessarily that we're fighting people around us, but we live to fight another day when it comes to life, because life is always going to throw us curveballs, and we have to be up at bat, ready to hit them. And that's all there is to it. With focus on self this month or this week, I feel that this is an important part of the recreation of yourself. Not that there was anything wrong with the old you, but the whole goal is to constantly improve ourselves. And this, unfortunately, is a big part of that. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, please do click the link below in the description and send me a copy. I would definitely appreciate that. We're going to move on to Virgo, which is focused on the past. We continue to have Ceres influencing Virgo in retrograde. Feels like Ceres retrograde goes on forever. I don't know off the top of my head how long it is, unlike the major planets, but it does feel like it is taking quite a long time with her retrograde. What's interesting about this, though, is if Ceres is all about nurturing and we're reflecting that back at us. We're just all about nurturing. Check it out. Wow, that was weird. My husband's computer just started talking to me for no reason. Anyways, if Ceres is all about nurturing and we're retrograding that or mirroring that back at ourselves with focus on the past, this is actually an interesting time for you to take a look back at where nurturing yourself became an issue. Where did you learn bad behavior? A lot of women learn bad behavior from their mothers, actually, and their mothers are not trying to teach them bad behavior. Mothers sacrifice themselves for their loved ones constantly. And while we don't realize at the time when we're doing it, we are actually teaching our children bad behavior in the process because we're sacrificing ourselves for others, which teaches them that their only worth is to do the same. So when I say, where did you learn bad behavior? It doesn't have to come from what you would consider to be a bad source. It doesn't have to come from trauma or abuse. Um, in many cases, we just pick up habits from people that either work for them and not for us, or they worked at that time and they're not going to work now. And that sort of makes it very difficult for us to change our behavior or how we do things, if that makes sense. And specifically when it comes to self-care, we pick up a lot of bad habits from a lot of different people in terms of self-care. People of my generation, I'm a Gen X, okay? So my parents were baby boomers. My grandparents were part of what they consider the greatest generation, right? I picked up a lot of habits from my grandma that were very, very good. Her work ethic, for one. I picked up a lot of really good traits from her over the years, as well as genetically have them. At the same time, though, I also picked up some habits of hers that may have worked for her, but not necessarily are the best thing, like her independent streak, for example. Being an independent woman, having an independent woman influence growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was a huge, big deal. And I'm so grateful to it. But there is a point where you're too independent. There is a point where you're independent to fault. And that is sort of where she is. And in taking care of her in these days, I can see where I have picked up some of those habits as well. And that we are learning together how to be independent without being independent to a fault, if that makes sense. So I'm learning and sharing, and we're growing together. That is a wonderful thing, don't get me wrong, but you want to make sure that you are nurturing yourself. And if you are over nurturing or under nurturing, this week is a really good opportunity to kind of look back and figure out where that comes from, where you learned that, and unlearn it if it's not working for you. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, please click the link below in the description and send me a copy. I would greatly appreciate it. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Libra. Libra is also focused on the past, moving into being focused on the mind and how your mind works specifically, with no influences at all this week, except for, of course, the moon, as the moon actually does make her way through your sign this week. Specifically, we're starting on Tuesday. The moon's trine with Pluto, which goes retrograde this week, actually is very helpful when we're talking about emotional thought process, because the moon's influence is influencing the mind and how your mind works this week. So this is actually kind of an interesting way of looking at things here. The moon moves into an kind of a little bit of an opposition actually with Neptune, which is really close to moving out of Pisces for the first time in a really long time. When the moon is in an opposition with Neptune, Neptune's also a very highly emotional planet. So you've got emotion on top of emotion going on here. For Libras are air signs. So you're intellectually driven people ruled by Venus, the planet of femininity and love. You wonder why the word balance is associated with Libra. This is why, because every single Libra holds a balance of masculine and feminine energy. Not that the rest of us don't, but Libras are really good at being able to balance that out. However, there are times where getting into an overly emotional space is going to throw all of that out of balance. So with Neptune focused on your long-term goals, the moon bringing in emotional thoughts about your long-term goals, this is definitely going to be the death of your long-term goals. If you're looking at it with too emotionally, it isn't going to work out. But the moon's trine with Pluto, which is retrograde, is actually still very helpful. Pluto is your source of power. It sort of reflects back at you what you're doing to kill your own power in a way. And when it's retrograded, it's really mirroring that back at you. So it gives you an understanding of how emotional thought process really isn't your best friend. It's not helping you to be able to make the decisions you need to improve your life, if that makes sense. The moon's opposition with Jupiter the next day, now we're into Wednesday, also makes things a little bit tricky. Jupiter is focused right in the middle, right on the cusp of your long-term career goals. So again, emotional thinking going into your long-term career goals, there's a difference between this feels like the right direction that I need to go in versus which is emotional, an emotional way that we make decisions, or a fear-based decision. That is a decision based on some serious emotional trauma, okay? That is not a good energy to bring into a decision that needs to be made specifically when it comes to your career goals. So you have to take what makes sense, obviously, into consideration, but you also have to take into consideration what feels best to you in terms of what you need to do. So the moon's going to come in there, try to throw everything out of balance, and you got to be the one going, wait a minute, no, I'm overly emotionally thinking about this, and you take yourself out of it, clear your mental space to allow yourself to focus in a way that is a little bit more balanced so that you can make the best decision possible. And I know you can, because the Libras are brilliant. Almost every Libra I've ever known has this streak of brilliance in them that if they harness it, they could probably take over the world, but they're humble enough not to in many cases, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, please click the link below in the description and send me a coffee. I would appreciate it very much. Speaking of coffee, oh, it's good stuff. And I'm going to move on to Scorpio. The moon moves into Scorpio on Thursday and spends the rest of the week in Scorpio in opposition with that retrograde Mercury, in opposition with the sun, in opposition with Uranus, all planets, of course, that are in Taurus, which is your opposite sign, obviously. As we kick off the moon's time in your sign, the moon moves into a T-square with Pluto, as well as Jupiter and Mercury. Now, with focus on the home, what's interesting about this to me is I feel like, first of all, you may want to be focused on your career goals, but it seems that home issues or home problems are sort of trying to take your focus away from what you want to focus on, which is a little bit of a challenge. It's kind of annoying, actually, when that happens. I'm in that situation and just going, why doesn't everybody understand that this is important to me and leave me alone, kind of a thing. But then someday they might just leave us alone for good, and that would not be good either. So we won't do that. Pluto's focus is on your day-to-day schedule, and Pluto is all about your specific source of power. In retrograde, it takes your power, the feeling that you have any power away, especially in a situation like this, but it also mirrors that power back at you so that it gives you an opportunity to understand where you are the one that is stifling your own power, if that makes sense. And we can blame everybody else. All right. We're all really good at blaming everybody else, but it is always ourselves. We are always the ones that are ultimately to blame for that. Everybody else and what they do, they just contribute to what we're doing to hold ourselves back, if that makes sense. And so Pluto is sort of bringing this to light, right? And at the same time, reminding you not to get overly frustrated when your schedule does not work your way. Being a fixed sign, as Scorpios are, Scorpios don't like abrupt changes. I'm not saying they can't get through abrupt changes, but there are times when you have something that you want to focus on specifically and somebody comes up to change your plans, that can be really frustrating. You can get irritated and frustrated about it, or you can let it ruin your whole flipping day. That's what we want to avoid, because honestly, everybody else and their crap means nothing when it comes to what you need to do, right? As we move through, the moon continues that opposition with Uranus, the sun, and that retrograde Mercury focuses on career for all three planets. The moon continues to focus on home. This actually provides the feeling in some cases like you just can't make changes, like you're powerless to change the situation that you're in right now, which is not true. That's just your mind telling you that you can't change so that you don't do anything about the change. There's a great metal song out there that I absolutely love, and basically the lyrics of the song are, if you don't like where you are, get out. Move somewhere else, go do something else, because it's the only way that you're going to resolve that problem. As we round out and end the week, the moon actually moves in to a very magical place. Still a little bit moves out of that opposition, which is good. Does move into a square with Saturn, which is focused on finances. So this sort of brings up one of those little, I really want to buy this thing to improve I really want to buy new curtains because I don't like the old ones, but your money is going to things that are more responsible than new curtains because you want them right now, sort of a thing. It's frustrating, mildly frustrating. It's not the end of the world, but the moon does move into a grand trine with Mars as well as Neptune. Grand trines are amazing. All three planets working together for a common cause, not just specifically for you, but specifically for you, if that makes sense. As the moon starts to move out of your sign, focus for you continues to be on your home. Mars focus is on our inner closet. So we're talking about the release of old anger. We all have a little bit of it in there. And Neptune's focus is on finances. So this is actually a beautiful opportunity for you guys to release some old mindsets around financial gain. Everybody seems to be in the same boat. Nobody has enough money. Everybody is broke, so to speak, right? The more you tell yourself the broker you are. And the more you tell yourself that you're broke, the longer you're going to be broke. And some of those mindsets actually happen really early on in life, much earlier on than I ever thought was humanly possible. But it's true. Whether it directly affected you or not as a child, just what the words that the adults used around you influence how you look at money and how you see money and whether or not you get more of it, honestly. So that is what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, please click the link below in the description and send me a coffee. I would greatly appreciate that. We're going to move on to Sagittarius, who has one of the lucky ones. Nothing, absolutely nothing influencing your sign this week. Now, we are ending the week noon on Saturday with the moon in 29 degrees Scorpio, which means by the end of the day on Saturday, the moon is moving into your sign. But, oh, sorry about that. That snuck up out of nowhere. However, outside of that, there is no influences coming in. Focus is on those you love this week, with no influences of any other planets. I want to say two things really are coming up for you guys. One, opportunities to be able to spend quality time with those that you love. I feel like, and especially Sagittarians, specifically because you guys have so much energy that you put into so many different things, really sitting down and spending quality time with those that you love is not something, it's definitely something that you want to do, but it's not always something that you have time to do. And so this is one of those instances where it's like, okay, it's time to make time to do that, because you're never going to have the time until you make the time. That makes sense. Okay. Not a single one throughout the recording. So obviously you guys are putting out so much energy. It's exhausting you. You may need to take a nap. Just saying. Anyways, that's one thing that's coming up for you guys. The other thing that I see coming up for you guys as well is there is the possibility of dealing with some specific communication faux pas, specifically around those that are closest to you. I find in my household, many of these communication patterns that are used are my fault. Okay. I've learned that the things that my kids do that annoy the crap out of me, they learned from me. And that happens a lot, because if you're doing something that isn't really good for you, you're not going to see it. You're not going to see that you're doing it, but you sure as heck are going to see when somebody else is doing it. And if you don't like it, it's triggering that you need to fix this within yourself, kind of a thing. So I feel like part of that is the bad language, so to speak, being mirrored back at you. Also, though, if there are miscommunication issues, because focus is on those you love, chances are that's where you're going to see most of the miscommunication problems. So you do just want to be aware of that, not to prevent it, but to understand and help it be an easier transition slash conversation slash what have you, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Enjoy. And if you love your horoscopes, please click the link below and send me a coffee. I would greatly appreciate it. Moving into Capricorn, it is official this week. Pluto moves retrograde this week. Still doesn't move back into Capricorn this week. Still 0 degrees Aquarius all week long. Probably will be for the next couple of weeks or so. However, I just started this like 2 minutes ago. All of a sudden. However, still feeling that influence there. With Pluto in retrograde, like you guys don't have any experience with this. Pluto has been in Capricorn for forever now. So you have plenty of experience of not just Pluto, but Pluto in retrograde. We're mirroring back that sort of sense of personal power. We're mirroring back our ability to make changes. And while Capricorn is a cardinal sign, which basically moves freely and can make changes as and when it is necessary, Capricorn is the more fixed of the cardinal signs. And most of the Capricorns that I've known, they don't like changing the way they do things, even if the way they do things is no longer relevant or working against them, or in some way, shape, or form harming their abilities to move forward in some way. So I feel like this week's Pluto going retrograde really is focused in many ways on that. It's also focused on your day-to-day schedule. So that's actually a very easy place for you to start embracing change, specifically those changes that come up into your schedule that you have no control over, that force you to have to rearrange your whole dang schedule in order to fit this in. I hate that too. I don't know anybody that enjoys it. Um, but it's life, and life does that quite a lot to us. It forces us to rearrange everything for something that we did not expect, good, bad, or indifferent. Now I'm getting the hiccup. Pluto is in a T-square, not quite all week. Forms this T-square about midweek with Mars, which is still focused on inner trauma. We've had a Mars Pluto opposition here for a while now, so this isn't news. But when Jupiter moves into a T-square with these two planets, now it does sort of become news. And Jupiter is focused on your long-term goals. Now, one of the reasons why this presents a challenge is because the challenge presents a lesson. And when we're talking about being flexible with our time, the challenge comes when we're being inflexible. And when we're being inflexible, we might be turning our backs on things that could be absolutely wonderful because we're too afraid to change, if that makes sense. So I feel like in many cases, some old traumas are going to come up around this. It's a way for you to be able to identify where this fear comes from so that you can help eliminate it, if that makes sense. And Jupiter is all about expansion. It's all about growth in your specific goals. You want to make sure that you're moving forward in your goals. And a lot of these old mindsets are really going to hold you back, specifically the one about not being flexible. You have to be flexible. You never know what's coming around the corner that you might be missing if you decide not to be flexible. So that is what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do consider sending me a copy. Click the link below in the description. I would really appreciate it. Moving on to Aquarius, focus is on relationships for Aquarius. Although Pluto, which officially goes retrograde this week, continues to be focused on your day-to-day schedule and moves into a T-square this week with Jupiter as well as Mars. Now that Mars-Pluto opposition has been going on for a while, so we're pretty used to that. Jupiter moving into position to join this challenge and make it a little bit bigger. That's not something that we are used to, unfortunately. Pluto's focus is on your day-to-day schedule. That retrograde almost dampens your sense of personal power in a way, makes you feel like you have the inability to change in any way, shape, or form, whether you really need to make the change or not. Mars continues to be focused on that inner trauma place, so we're continuing to release old anger as if, I mean, it does feel like this has been the focus for a long time and we should have released all the anger now, but that's not necessarily going to happen. Jupiter is focused on your long-term goals. Now, it's what's really important here, and Mars's importance in this really is bringing up a lot of triggers of past trauma. And the more triggers of past trauma come up, that's more opportunities for you to understand where that trauma comes from, why you're holding on to it, and giving you the opportunity to release the anger around that specific trauma. When you keep hold of the anger, it turns into fear, it turns into worry, it turns into 1,000 excuses as to why you can't move forward in your goals. And I've seen this in myself umpteen thousand million different times in different ways. I'm the queen of excuses when it comes to holding myself back in many ways. And I know I'm not the only one. I'm sure that everybody does that to a certain extent. And those that don't have trained themselves not to. It's not something you're born with. You have to work at it. So it's constant work to avoid allowing your past anger to stop you from being who you are supposed to be. And most of us know deep down who we're supposed to be. Whether we chose it or not is really neither here nor there when it comes down to it. The good news is the grand sextile that Pluto is in with the moon right at the end of the week, the moon as well as Neptune. Now, there is a sextile between Pluto and Neptune this whole time. The moon comes in for a minute to make it a grand sextile and just adds another layer of juiciness to it. Neptune's focus is on finances. The moon's focus is on the home. Pluto's focus, again, is on your day-to-day schedule. I feel that, it's the end of the week, too. Most people are off on Saturday. Not everybody. Most people are off on Saturday. But with everything that's going on, I feel that being able to be at home and spend some time focused on a project at home is actually quite cleansing because it gives you some control in a world of chaos. If you clean out your closet, you have control over that, right? You have control over how you set it up, how you organize it, what have you. And it gives us an outlet to have that control because how Aquarians are, we are control freaks. And many of us that have had a lot of trauma in our lives are really big control freaks because we're trying to avoid that feeling like the plague the rest of our lives. So really, this sort of opens up an opportunity to have control over something, anything, but also something that brings you some sort of satisfaction and joy, like a job well done afterwards. So that is a really nice way to end the week. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do click the link below in the description and send me a coffee. I would greatly appreciate it. And we are going to move on to Pisces. We're rounding off the whole week with Pisces. We continue to have Saturn influencing Pisces. We continue to have Neptune influencing Pisces. One's on the front, one's on the back. Neptune looks dangerously close to actually leaving Pisces. Neptune's been in Pisces as long as I've been doing horoscopes, and I've been doing horoscopes for at least 8 or 9 years now. Same with Pluto and Capricorn. If he's moving out of Capricorn, I suppose Neptune can move out of Pisces too. I don't think that Neptune is actually moving out of Pisces this year, though. I think we're going to see a retrograde pretty soon, which will keep it in Pisces just a little bit longer. So we have both planets really playing into other planets in many ways. But let's look at the beginning of the week. Will start as Neptune's trine, in some cases not T square, grand trine with Venus as well as Pluto. Off and on, we're going to be seeing this. It won't be a T square. It won't be a grand sextile by the end of the week. It will continue to be a sextile with Venus, But Jupiter does move into that stage just there, or is in that stage at the beginning of the week, and then moves out of it. Jupiter's focus is on long-term goals. Venus is focused on your support system. And of course, Saturn is focused on finances. So this actually helps you find the support that you need in order to make sure that your financial goals are on the right track, that you're doing what you need to do to improve those goals. It's always important. We always have to remember, when it comes to long-term goals, or when it comes to any kind of goal, it's the work we put into it that matters. If we're not putting the right work into it, or if we're not putting any work into it, it's never going to go anywhere. So you can't just say, this is what I want, and then wait and sit for it to happen. We know that that does not work, unfortunately, right? Neptune also is in a grand sextile with Pluto and the moon right at the very end of the week. The sextile between Pluto and Neptune will continue for the whole week, but the moon adds another layer of magic to it, right at the end of the week there, bringing that influence of home into it. And it sort of kind of opens things up to be able to have the funds in order to work on a specific project at home that you've been putting off for a while. And not only does it provide the funds, it provides the time for you to do that also. It's almost impossible when you have the time and the funds, and they both line up together. So that's really good. Also, at the very end of the week, Neptune's grand trine with Mars and the moon is also very helpful as well. Mars is in a very interesting place and has been for weeks, very much focused on inner trauma and the release of that inner trauma, or the anger around that inner trauma. And while that doesn't seem helpful, and a trine is helpful, it actually really is, because these triggers are going to happen. There's a Mercury retrograde going on, right? So when you trigger that trauma, it gives you an opportunity to understand where that trauma comes from, why you're still holding on to it. Why do you feel you need to continue to be angry about it? And maybe gives you the opportunity to release the anger around that trauma as well. When you release the anger around your trauma ultimately no longer has power over you. And therefore, your trauma is no longer driving the bus. And if you want to be successful, you have to be the one driving the bus. Actually, perfect example of this is Kurt Cobain. He was brilliant. He had a lot of emotional trauma that was going on. He never dealt with it. He still became very successful in a band. He still made tons of money. None of that mattered. He thought that would fix his problem, and it did not fix his problem. And ultimately, because he couldn't find a fix for his problem, he took his own life, or somebody took it for him. That's a whole conspiracy theory thing that I'm not getting into. The point is that a lot of people go through this situation. He is not alone. So it is better, and you're ultimately more successful when you can identify that as something that you no longer have control over, that you're not going to get a resolution over, and you let it go, because that's what you have the power to do. You don't have the power to go back in time and change a childhood from a traumatic one into a better one. Trust me, I'd have done it already if that was the case. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do click the link in the description below and send me a coffee. I would really appreciate that. And that's what I have for everybody. Thanks so much for hanging out. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. These are your horoscopes for the week. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next week. You have the power to make it a great week, Mercury retrograde or not. Have a good one, everybody.